watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
House Speaker Michael Madigan laid out a roadmap to legalizing cannabis in Illinois. On Monday, during a rare press conference with public affairs reporting interns, he described what he sees as the top controversial aspect that might block the plan from getting the votes it needs in the House. He says that forgiving drug dealers could prove very controversial.
The key on that issue is how far do you go in terms of the expungement. If you're talking about some teenager that was doing drugs and was only guilty of possession, that's one thing. If you're talking about people that were actually in the business, they were dealers, and you want to expunge those records, that's a different case. And I'm not sure how they treat that in the proposed language, but that'll be very important in terms of finding 60 people in the House to vote for the bill.
Joining us now for more insight and analysis is a Senate Republican, Jason Barickman from Bloomington. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
We had you on before the start of this legislative session, and you said you would support the plan to legalize recreational cannabis. This week, you're quoted in NPR Illinois saying you don't support this plan. What changed?
Well, no, I said that I support legalizing cannabis for adult use only, provided the appropriate safeguards are in place. The governor's plan here falls way short. It's incredibly controversial across the board. I think what you're hearing is that Republicans and Democrats alike look at the governor's proposal and have identified key aspects of it which the public is going to find incredibly controversial. The speaker's comments this week. There's an expungement process that contemplates expunging the record of offenses that remain illegal even after Pritzker's legalization plan would be put in place. That's an incredible proposition. It's far removed from what most Illinoisans will view as acceptable.
That's a little bit rhetorical, right? So the facts are that a person could, if this bill passes, a person could possess up to 30 grams. This bill would also expunge or forgive the records of people who had cannabis convictions of up to 500 grams.
Yeah, drug dealers and others who are selling and manufacturing drugs up to 500 grams, a wild proposition.
But Senator Staines points out that they weren't trying to be inconsistent in that, and that their intention, the spirit of it, was that, look, when we legalize this moving forward, dispensaries who have a legal license will, of course, because they have to have enough stock in supply to meet their demand, will at that time have more than 500 grams in their possession, so that they're not just expunging or forgiving the people who used to use, but they are expunging or forgiving the people who used to deal as well.
Dispensaries who are complying with this newly proposed legislation have survived background checks and other scrutiny of them to determine whether they're a safe actor, would be legalized under the governor's proposal. But my point comes back to this. I'm willing to support legalizing cannabis, adult use only, but only provided that it's done in the right way. The governor's proposal here, it's just wildly off base. The expungement process is one of those examples. Look further. The expungement process proposes that individuals who are felons would have some of these really controversial offenses expunged. I suggested to the governor that he has the power to do this on his own. Governor Ryan used the broad clemency powers that governors have to do something similar to this years ago. I think if this is a priority...
So he could do this without requiring the legislative votes.
That's right.
That is interesting.
If this is his priority to expunge all these records, mind you, when I was on your show before, I talked about legalizing cannabis. I said we need a safe market that is taxed and regulated. I didn't talk to you about expunging all these felons and these drug dealers.
Not all felons, but 800,000. Right now, the current proposal of the Chicago Tribune, and I think the sponsors say, this is not just a couple people. This is 800,000 people who their criminal convictions would be wiped clean.
That's right. People have broken the law. And we live in a rule-abiding...
What you disagree with?
What? We live in a society that expects us to uphold the rule of law. If we changed the speed limit today and raised it, we're not going to go back and expunge all the speeding tickets that people had. We're not going to clean up the records.
But you agree that the speed limit is just. You disagree that violating cannabis or the use of cannabis is just use of the law.
I think speed limits are always open for debate, and they've changed over the years. The point is, the laws that are in place today are the laws. I'm willing to consider expungement of some of those low-level records. We did some of that in recent years, minors who were convicted of having very low levels of possession of cannabis. We want to make sure that we're not jeopardizing people's ability to pursue a career and move forward in their life. But what the governor proposes here is vastly different than that. It includes felons. It includes felony convictions. It includes drug dealers.
Low-level felonies.
Sure, but felons that could put you in jail for 1 to 3 years.
And people have a really hard time today getting a job because that's on their record.
Because they made a choice to break the law.
I guess the question is, though, you can only give, that's the spirit of forgiveness. You can only forgive people who've done wrong. You can't go around giving forgiveness to those who never did anything wrong. So what exactly, you get one chance to vote on this, likely this session. Are you really comfortable voting no, even just because the expungement, even though that might mean giving those 800,000 people, reversing the wrongs of history and saying, we're going to give you a clean slate? You'd vote against that?
There's a host of issues with the governor's proposal which cause me, and not just me, I think Republicans and Democrats, and importantly, the public, lots of concerns. The expungement process, who qualifies, how it works, that's one of them. How the governor proposes to spend this money, I think will be received as wildly controversial. It doesn't go unnoticed in this state and the country that Illinois has a spending problem. We've got unpaid bills that amount to billions of dollars. This program, if legalized, is going to generate some money. I think that the taxpayers of this state, the voters of this state who've demanded that we get our priorities straight, say, look, if there's money, put it towards our existing obligations. And this proposal falls short on a whole host of things, including that.
How would you describe the impact of the war on drugs?
Well, I think the war on drugs has had an impact negatively on some people and some communities.
You're saying some people. Put a finer point on that. What do you mean by some people?
Well, on both sides of the equation, right? I mean, I think there are victims to the war on drugs that include the communities who've been damaged by it. I think to the people, young people especially, who've been preyed on by drug dealers. So there's a whole host of concerns on that. The governor's proposal says he wants to do something about that. I support that concept. I think it's a laudable goal, that we can support communities who've been disenfranchised by this. But it has to be balanced against the fact that our state does not live up to its existing obligations. We have billions of dollars in unpaid bills.
How much more money of marijuana revenue should go to the bill backlog before you can support it? How much more? Because right now I think it's 10%.
Right, it's 10%. We have a long ways to go to restore the confidence the public should have that our priorities are straight. 10% falls well short of that. As I've told the
15, 20, where do you want to see it go?
As I've told the sponsors, I'm willing to negotiate all of the issues here. I think we can reach a bipartisan agreement, but the proposal here, the governor's proposal, way short of that. Interestingly, I've asked repeatedly for the governor to sit down with me and talk about some of my concerns with his proposal, talk about how we might reach a common ground. He seems to be totally disengaged from this debate. He's removed himself from it. Maybe that's a good sign, because I'll tell you.
Back on that.
Well,
they say that they are still involved in ongoing negotiations, and that there's still some working groups that are having conversations. They're not in all of those, but they say they're still very engaged.
Since this bill has been introduced, I've not had any conversations with the governor or his office on the bill. I'm not sure if he's aware of my concerns. I'm open to sitting down with him and talking about that. And I'll tell you, I don't know, maybe it's best that the governor remove himself entirely, though. When the governor injected himself in this legislative debate that we were having, it turned. And the result of that is a bill that's out there that does not reflect a bipartisan agreement. That's a key point, Mark. We sat down last year when we talked about this, the legislators, we said, let's reach a bipartisan agreement. Let's meet and come to that agreement. The governor comes in, puts out a proposal that does not embrace the bipartisan discussions that we've had.
Just for the record, the governor's office says, and in that NPR piece, Jacqueline Driscoll reported earlier this week, Christian Mitchell told her that's just not true. The tax rates were Republican ideas, and the 10% going to the bill backlog, as you already articulated, a Republican idea. Are those not examples of Republican?
We have never suggested that 10% of the money go towards unpaid bills.
Some does.
Yes, a meaningful amount, because I think taxpayers are demanding that. We pushed back on the expungement process, just like I said to you. The governor has the ability to do these expungements on his own. If this is a priority of his for how he legalizes cannabis, he should just use the power that he has to do that and not muddy the waters on what is a very difficult debate. It's going to be tough to reach a majority vote. It's going to be tough to reach a bipartisan vote. I think it can happen, but it happens when we focus on the issue. The issue is, how do we tax and regulate a marketplace that exists today illegally? That, to me, is a problem that can be solved in a bipartisan manner, so long as the governor moderates his approach on how to do it.
All right, Senator Jason Barickman, thank you for joining us. Speaking of a very difficult debate, up next we talk to two top House Democrats who are leading the way on sports gambling and video gaming, two other potential parts of Governor Pritzker's upcoming budget. We're back in a moment.